Everyone, welcome back to CyberSecurityTV. So data encoding is very essential part between communication between client and server, and especially when the client sends some data to the server over the browser, and then when the server sends data back and how the client interprets the data. Oftentimes, attacker or the pen testers use the misconfiguration leading to this data encoding techniques, which is used by application and be able to attack or penetrate the system. So today we're gonna learn about the basics of what is the encoding, URL encoding, HTML encoding, and how as a pen tester is important to you, significant to you to know about this stuff. So why do we need to even understand the encoding? So as I said, even though application have different purposes and technologies, the use of encoding is something that cannot be neglected. So from the pen test perspective, as I said, understanding what kind of encoding is being used by the application, and then how it is fundamentally works is very essential. If there is a mismatch on how the data is sent back to the client, and if it's not translated or interpreted the same way or the exact data which was sent by the server, then there is a misconfiguration or mismatch which can be exploited by the attacker. So that's why we really need to focus and understand. So next time when you are pen testing any of the application, you would pay close attention to what is the the response that you're getting, and does it match to the content type. Actually we are skipping ahead of what I want to get into, but you understand that we really need to understand this the response and how that's interpreted by the application or the browser. So let's start with the URL encoding. Now URL encoding, so any characters which are sent in the URL has to follow the US ASCII code character set. Safe characters, so for example hash or $sign or a backslash, forward slash, if those characters are present in the URL, they must be encoded. And one of the easiest way to probably figure out whether it's using the URL encoding, if they have percentage sign at the front, and then of course the decimal part, then that's part of that's how you encode the URL. Now I'll show you one example on where we can see how do we interpret whether this is using the URL encoding or not, and we'll take the Google example. But anyway, so now the second question comes is how do we know which characters to encode versus which do not, right? So here is a list of table, and I think you can also get this one from the OWASP and Wikipedia. So here these characters such as dot and hyphen are not required, these are not unsafe characters. These characters are reserved, and this requires encoding, as we saw backslash would be %2f. So these are unsafe characters, and in order to successfully transmit over the URL as per the US ASCII character set, you have to encode these characters, otherwise it's not going to make it through. Now there are some common characters we we would see every day whenever we are browsing something. So for example, question mark will become %3f, ampersand will become %24, and then backslash becomes %2f. Now if we take an example here, so this one, as you can see, I did %2f, which is interpreted as an forward slash when I'm searching it, right? The backslash, sorry. Same way, if I do %3f, this was a question mark. Oh, I did 23f, sorry. So this was a question mark, right? Same way, if I do %24, which is an ampersand. So if you are sorry, the $sign, I missed that. But yeah, the gist is when you are transferring this special character, so you cannot be just like this. You have to URL encode. So when you enter it, the browser automatically is gonna encode these characters and send it back to the server. You cannot transfer a Like you could not do just like this. If you want to attach like a cross-site scripting, you cannot just pass things like that. It has to be encoded, and that's why oftentimes we use a burp encoder feature whenever we want to perform like injection attacks or cross-site scripting attacks. So that's where you will encode this your payload, because if you send it as is, it's not gonna be executed or reach to the backend. So you would encode using the data burp encoder and then send it back, send it via URL. Alright, so let's go back to our presentation. So that's like the common characters and how the URL encoding works. Now let's talk about the HTML encoding. So even in HTML, it is important to consider the information integrity in the URLs and ensure that user agents display the data correctly. So same as URL encoding, you want to make sure it displays the data back to the user or to the browser correctly as it should be. So there are two main issues to address. Like one, we need to inform the user agent what type of data we are expecting, and the other one is preserve the real meaning of the data. And I'll give you example for both. So for the content type, like when you are doing like a pen testing, right, and you want to generate like a potential attacks, you should not only know how this kind of encoding works, but also know how the decoding works. And that's why again I'll go back to our burp encoder example, where you can easily use like encode and decode this kind of data. So here, as you see, like using the burp decoder, whenever you want to let's say put this script tag or script payload, and if you put it as is, it's not going to be interpreted. So what you're gonna do is you can encode using the URL encoding or HTML encoding, and then pass it on either via form fill as a payload, or maybe directly into the URL. Depending on where you're sending, you have to either encode like HTML or URL encoding. So that's the there are several ways you can instruct which encoding techniques to use. Pretty much like commonly we would see this content type text HTML cat set is equal to UTF-8. So whenever you're observing any application response, this is what you're gonna see. Like sometimes it's JSON, sometimes it's maybe a PHP, maybe some script, JavaScript. So depending on that, usually if it's an HTML response, you would see this. Now you can set there are different ways you can set in the header using this header in the PHP. Then in the .NET you have this response.charset, and in JSP you can set the page content type text HTML. So there are different ways you can set, and this is something that you should really know, because if you find during the pen testing there is a mismatch between how the response is interpreted versus what the content type is been set by the application, you can recommend your client to depending on what their technology is, you can recommend like this is how they should set their response header for a given content type. Now one other example is you could see that here we are using greater than sign, right, for each example. So let's say there is a tag like HTML tag which is HTML or head. We are using this greater than sign to kind of close the tag. Here we are using this as a condition, like if x is greater than 7, so value is greater than 7. So here the meaning of greater than is different. And here there is just a text which has Bob has greater than 3x. So again, in all three examples we are using this sign for a different purpose, and to preserve the real meaning of it, we have to encode it and decode it as and when it is required. And that's the critical piece for any pen tester. When this is not done correctly, you can easily exploit this, because probably perhaps not every time developer would know that they have to even encode like this teeny tiny stuff, and they would miss on something, and we can use as a pen tester to our advantage. We have seen there's plenty of ways that how you defend against the cross-site scripting. So whenever there is, let's say, entity character encoding, or the I think this is called the character entity. then you put the ampersand sign first, then you put this LT, like whatever the character you have, like less than, greater than. If it's greater than, you put the GT and ampersand. So this is how you encode it. So when it's coming back to the browser, it's gonna interpret like, okay, this is the greater than character. However, it's not gonna execute it as in, like it's a JavaScript. Same way if it's an numeric, like decimal. So this is the numeric decimal, so you put the ampersand, then hash, then let's say character D, which is decimal is 60, and then semicolon. Same way if you have to do it like a hexadecimal, then you would do ampersand, then hyphen x, h, hexadecimal is 3c, and then semicolon. So this is like when you I think the good exercise would be like, whenever you are doing the future pen test, and observe this carefully, like are they using like what kind of encoding they're using. This encoding, can you switch that encoding, like can you change some part of it and misbehave? Because sometimes what I've seen during my personal experience, the application would be sending data back in the JSON, however the content type is set to the HTML. So luckily we can still inject our script tags, because the like the developer application thinks one cannot execute JSON in the browser. However, since the content type there is a mismatch, I can still execute my script payload, right? So definitely check out, like try to enumerate this and try to focus on these things whenever you're doing the future pen testing, and hope this gives you some valuable lessons on why encoding is required. Of course, we're gonna go deep into this one. We'll enumerate different techniques and, like attacking vectors based on this in the future videos. But hopefully you enjoyed this one. Please, if you have, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel, and let me know in the comment section what else you're looking for. Thank you so much, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.